A bank manager bullies a black man for loan. But what happened next will shock you.
The sun blazed down on the modest storefront of a small bakery in downtown Savannah, Georgia. Inside, Marcus Evans stood at the counter, absently kneading dough while his mind churned with worry. His bakery, Southern Needs, had become a beloved cornerstone of the community, known for its fresh peach cobbler and warm sort of loaves. But behind the counter, Marcus knew the truth. The business was hanging on by a thread. The numbers weren't adding up. Rising costs and a leaky roof had drained his savings. Marcus's dream of expanding the bakery into a cafe seemed impossible unless he secured a loan. But he couldn't give up, not on the bakery, and not on his late grandmother's legacy. "Daddy, the oven's acting weird again," his daughter, Alana, called from the kitchen. At 14, Alana was always quick to help, her sunny smile a reflection of Marcus's hope. "I'll check it later," Marcus said, forcing a reassuring smile. "Right now, I've got a meeting to keep." The meeting was at Franklin First Bank, the largest bank in town. Marcus had spent days preparing his loan application, complete with financial records, a solid business plan, and even testimonials from loyal customers. He knew the risk of rejection, but he believed in his pitch. The bank's lobby was cold and clinical, its marble floors gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Marcus adjusted his tie, a rare addition to his wardrobe, and approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Mr. Preston," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his nerves. The receptionist barely looked up. "Third door on the left." Marcus knocked, then entered the office. Behind the large oak desk sat a middle-aged man with thinning blonde hair and an air of self-importance. Mr. Preston didn't bother standing up. "Marcus Evans?" Preston asked, glancing at his computer screen. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, extending a hand. Preston ignored it. "Have a seat," Preston said curtly, gesturing to a chair that seemed deliberately uncomfortable. Marcus sat, his shoulders straight. "Thank you for meeting with me. I believe you'll find my proposal compelling. My bakery has been growing steadily over the past 3 years, and with this loan, I plan to expand into a cafe model. Here's the full." Preston held up a hand, silencing him. "I've already looked at your application," he said, his tone cold. "And frankly, Mr. Evans, I don't think you're a suitable candidate." The words hit Marcus like a punch. "I don't understand. My credit score is solid, and my business generates consistent revenue. If you'll just review?" Preston sighed dramatically, leaning back in his chair. "It's not about numbers, Mr. Evans. It's about risk. Small businesses like yours, especially in certain neighborhoods, often struggle to sustain long-term growth. From where I'm sitting, this loan would be a bad investment." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My neighborhood? What does that have to do with anything?" Preston gave a thin smile, as if Marcus were too naive to grasp the unspoken truth. "We have to consider all factors, including location and clientele. I'm sorry, but the answer is no." The rejection stung, but it was the patronizing tone that made Marcus's blood boil. Still, he refused to let his temper get the better of him. He gathered his documents and stood. "Thank you for your time," he said evenly. As Marcus turned to leave, Preston added, "There's always payday lenders, you know. Some of them are less picky." Marcus froze, his grip tightening on the folder in his hand. Without a word, he walked out of the office, his heart pounding with anger and humiliation. Outside, the hot Georgia sun did little to warm his spirits. He sat in his truck for a moment, staring at the bank's sleek facade. How could someone like Preston, with his smug demeanor and thinly veiled biases, hold so much power over people's dreams? That evening, Marcus was back in the bakery, rolling dough with a ferocity that startled Alana. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, setting down a tray of cookies. "Just had a rough day," Marcus said, exhaling deeply. "But we'll figure something out. We always do." As the two worked side by side, the bakery phone rang. Marcus wiped his hands on his apron and picked it up. "Southern Needs, this is Marcus." A smooth, unfamiliar voice came through the line. "Good evening, Mr. Evans. My name is Richard Sterling. I represent a private investment firm, and we're very interested in your business." Marcus frowned. "An investment firm? How did you hear about me?" "A mutual acquaintance mentioned your name," Sterling replied. "I'd like to discuss an opportunity that could benefit both of us. Can we meet tomorrow? Say 10 a.m. at the Magnolia Room downtown?" Marcus hesitated. The timing seemed almost too convenient, but he couldn't afford to dismiss any potential help. "All right, I'll be there." "Excellent," Sterling said. "You won't regret it." As the call ended, Marcus felt the flicker of hope and suspicion. Who was this Richard Sterling, and why was he so interested in a struggling bakery? The next morning, Marcus entered the Magnolia Room, an upscale restaurant he'd only ever seen from the outside. The polished wood floors and crystal chandeliers screamed wealth and privilege, making Marcus feel out of place in his simple shirt and tie. At a corner table sat a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a GQ magazine, dark tailored suit, salt and pepper hair, and an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. "Mr. Evans," the man called, standing to shake Marcus's hand. "Richard Sterling. Thank you for meeting me." Marcus shook his hand cautiously. "Nice to meet you. I'm curious, how exactly do you know about my bakery?" Sterling smiled, his teeth white and perfect. "Let's just say I have a soft spot for small businesses with heart. I've heard you run one of the best bakeries in town. I'd like to help you expand." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? You don't even know me." Sterling chuckled. "True, but I've done my research and I believe in potential. Here's the deal. I'll give you the funds you need, no strings attached. Consider it a grant, not a loan." The offer was so generous, it sounded absurd. Marcus leaned back, studying Sterling's polished demeanor. "Why would you do that?" Sterling's smile faltered slightly. "Let's just say I have my reasons. Do we have a deal?" Before Marcus could respond, a waiter arrived with coffee, and Sterling's phone buzzed on the table. He silenced it quickly, but Marcus caught a glimpse of the screen. A name flashed across it: Preston. Marcus's stomach tightened. Was this the same Preston from the bank? And if so, what connection did he have to Sterling? The twists were just beginning, and Marcus knew he had to tread carefully. Something about this offer didn't feel right, but he couldn't deny the pull of hope it brought. Marcus left the Magnolia Room with a head full of questions. Richard Sterling's offer seemed too good to be true, but the mention of Preston's name on Sterling's phone unnerved him. Was this some elaborate game between the two men? He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there was more going on than Sterling let on. Back at the bakery, Marcus shared the strange encounter with Alana. She listened intently, her youthful optimism clashing with her father's skepticism. "Dad, maybe he really does just want to help. People aren't always out to get us, you know," she said. "Maybe," Marcus replied, though his tone said otherwise. "But I've learned that when something feels too good to be true, it usually is." As the week went on, Marcus chose to focus on his bakery. The broken oven needed fixing, the staff was stretched thin, and the bills weren't going to pay themselves. Sterling's offer loomed in the back of his mind, but Marcus wasn't ready to take the bait. He didn't trust it. Then, 5 days after their meeting, something extraordinary happened. Alana was the first to notice the envelope in the bakery's mail. "Hey Dad, there's something here you might want to see." The envelope was unassuming, plain white with no return address. Marcus frowned as he tore it open. Inside was a typed letter and a cashier's check for $50,000. "Dear Mr. Evans, I recently learned about your struggles in securing funding for your bakery. Your dedication to your craft and your community deeply moved me. Please accept this grant as a gesture of faith in your business. No repayment is required. Sincerely, a friend." Marcus stared at the letter, his heart racing. His first reaction was disbelief. Who sends this kind of money without expecting something in return? "Dad, is that real?" Alana asked, pointing at the check. Marcus examined it closely. The bank's watermark, the signatures, it all appeared legitimate. He flipped the letter over, searching for clues, but it was blank. "Who would do this?" he muttered. "No idea, but we need to use it," Alana said, practically bouncing with excitement. "Think about what we could do with $50,000. Fix the oven, expand the cafe. This could save everything." Marcus hesitated. The money was a godsend, but the lack of transparency made him uneasy. "It's generous, but I don't know if I can accept this. What if it's some kind of trap?" Alana rolled her eyes. "Dad, not everyone's out to get you. Whoever sent this obviously believes in us. Don't overthink it." Despite his reservations, Marcus deposited the check the next day. The bakery's transformation was immediate. Repairs that had been postponed for months were finally completed. New equipment arrived, making production faster and smoother. Marcus even hired an extra set of hands to help with the growing customer base. For the first time in months, the bakery was thriving again. Customers noticed the changes, praising Marcus for investing in the business. Still, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that he didn't know who to thank, or whether the gift came with hidden strings. A week after the renovations were completed, Marcus found himself locking up the bakery late one evening. The streets were quiet, the warm glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. He was heading to his truck when a sleek black sedan pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down, and there sat Richard Sterling, his usual polished smile in place. "Good evening, Mr. Evans," Sterling said. "I see the bakery is doing well." Marcus's stomach tightened. "It is. What brings you here?" "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in," Sterling said, stepping out of the car. His tailored suit and confident demeanor seemed out of place in the quiet street. Marcus folded his arms. "If you're here to offer more money, save it. I'm not interested." Sterling chuckled. "Actually, I'm here to ask how you're enjoying the money you've already received." The words hit Marcus like a brick. "You?" Sterling nodded. "I'm the friend who sent the grant." Marcus's mind raced. Of course, it made sense. Sterling had mentioned supporting small businesses, and the timing matched. But why the secrecy? And why hadn't Sterling mentioned it during their first meeting? "Why didn't you just tell me?" Marcus asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Sterling's smile faltered for the first time. "I wanted to give you space to succeed without feeling indebted to me. I know how pride can get in the way." "Pride has nothing to do with it," Marcus shot back. "What I want is transparency. Why go through all this trouble? What's the catch?" "There's no catch," Sterling replied smoothly. "I simply believe in your business." But he hesitated, his expression shifting. "There is one thing you should know." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What?" "I wasn't the only one who learned about your rejection at Franklin First Bank," Sterling said. "Mr. Preston's behavior was brought to my attention, and I've been investigating him. What I found is troubling." "What do you mean?" Sterling leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Preston has been systematically denying loans to minority-owned businesses. You're not the first person he's turned away unfairly, and if I have my way, you'll be the last." Marcus's heart pounded. "You're saying this is about more than me?" Sterling nodded. "Exactly. With your permission, I'd like to use your story as part of a broader effort to expose the unethical practices at Franklin First Bank." Marcus stared at him, torn. Sterling's words struck a chord. He couldn't ignore the idea that other business owners might be facing the same uphill battle he'd endured. But the thought of aligning himself with Sterling, a man he still didn't fully trust, made him uneasy. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "Take your time," Sterling replied, his polished smile returning. "And remember, I'm on your side." As the sedan disappeared into the night, Marcus stood alone in the empty street, grappling with the weight of Sterling's proposal. Could he trust the man who had single-handedly revived his bakery? Or was there more to this story than Sterling was letting on? Marcus couldn't sleep that night. Sterling's sudden reveal of his involvement and his allegations against Preston left Marcus with more questions than answers. If Preston was truly blocking loans to minority-owned businesses, why was Sterling the one taking action? And why now? Marcus decided he needed more information before making any decisions. The next morning, Marcus called an old friend, Kevin, a journalist who had grown up in Savannah, but now worked for a regional news outlet. If anyone could help him dig into the truth, it was Kevin. "Marcus, it's been too long," Kevin exclaimed when they met at a local diner later that day. "What's going on? Alana still beating you at checkers?" Marcus chuckled, but the weight of the situation quickly sobered him. "Kevin, I need your help. Something's come up at the bakery, and I don't think I'm dealing with it alone anymore." Marcus laid out everything: the loan rejection, the mysterious donation, and Sterling's claims about Preston's discriminatory practices. Kevin leaned back in his seat, his brow furrowed. "Man, that's heady. Sterling's reputation is squeaky clean in the public eye, but that doesn't mean there's not dirt under the surface. And Preston? He always seemed like a suit who cared more about quotas than people." "So what do you think I should do?" Marcus asked. "Do I trust Sterling and go public with this? Or do I stay quiet and avoid getting tangled in something bigger?" Kevin thought for a moment. "I can help you dig into Preston's history, see if there's a pattern of what Sterling's talking about. As for Sterling, I'd tread carefully. People like him rarely make moves without an angle. Let's see what we can find before you make any big decisions." Over the next few days, Kevin got to work. Using his access to public records and sources within the banking industry, he uncovered a troubling pattern. Over the past 5 years, Preston had denied loans to nearly 80% of applicants from underserved neighborhoods, despite many having strong financials. In contrast, applicants from wealthier areas were approved at nearly double the rate. Kevin also found complaints from several small business owners, many of them minority entrepreneurs who felt they had been unfairly rejected. Most hadn't pursued legal action, fearing they wouldn't win against a major institution like Franklin First Bank. When Kevin presented his findings, Marcus's anger reignited. I knew he was a jerk, but this? It's systemic. There's more, Kevin said, sliding a file across the table. Preston's loan approvals had another pattern. Many of the approved loans went to businesses connected to a group of wealthy investors. Guess whose name popped up more than once? Marcus flipped through the file and froze. Richard Sterling? Kevin nodded. Sterling's connections to Franklin First Bank run deeper than he's letting on. He's not just some philanthropist swooping in to save the day. He's profited from Preston's practices, whether directly or indirectly. The revelation left Marcus reeling. Sterling's claims about Preston had seemed noble, but now it was clear there was a deeper game at play. Marcus decided he needed answers directly from the source. That evening he called Sterling and asked to meet at the Magnolia Room again. Sterling agreed, his tone as smooth and confident as ever. When Marcus arrived, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. I know about your connections to Franklin First Bank, he said, his voice steady but firm. And I know you've benefited from Preston's loan practices. So tell me, what's really going on? Sterling didn't flinch, but his polished demeanor cracked ever so slightly. Mr. Evans, I can see you've done your homework. Let me explain. I'm listening, Marcus said, folding his arms. Yes, I've had dealings with Franklin First, Sterling admitted. As a board member, I've seen firsthand how Preston's biases have hurt deserving entrepreneurs. It's precisely why I've been working to dismantle his influence. Dismantle it? Or use it? Marcus countered. Because from where I'm sitting, you've made a fortune while people like me were left to struggle. Sterling sighed, leaning forward. You're right. I benefited from the system in the past, but I'm trying to change that now. Supporting your bakery wasn't just about charity, it was about taking a stand. Preston has stepped on people like you for years, and it's time someone held him accountable. Marcus narrowed his eyes. And you expect me to believe you're doing this out of the goodness of your heart? No, Sterling said bluntly. I'm doing it because I see the bigger picture. People like Preston make the entire banking industry look corrupt. If Franklin First continues on this path, it'll collapse, and take my investments with it. Exposing him isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Marcus sat back, processing Sterling's words. While his honesty was refreshing, it didn't erase the fact that Sterling's motivations were far from altruistic. So, what do you want from me? Marcus asked. I need your story, Sterling said. If you're willing to come forward, your testimony could be the tipping point in bringing Preston and Franklin First's unethical practices to light. After the meeting, Marcus walked the streets of downtown Savannah, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. On one hand, going public with his story could expose Preston and help countless others who had been wronged. On the other hand, it meant aligning himself with Sterling, a man whose motives were far from pure. When he got home, Alana was waiting for him. Hey Dad, you okay? Marcus sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table. I'm not sure. Sterling wants me to go public with what happened at the bank. Alana frowned. Do you trust him? Not entirely, Marcus admitted. But if what he's saying is true, this could be bigger than just me. It could help other people like us. Then maybe it's worth it, Alana said softly. You've always told me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Maybe this is one of those times. Marcus smiled at his daughter, her words giving him clarity. She was right. This wasn't just about the bakery anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what he had. I'll do it, Marcus said, his voice resolute. But on my terms. The next day, Marcus called Kevin and Sterling. If they were going to expose Preston and Franklin First Bank, they were going to do it the right way, truthfully, transparently, and with Marcus in control of his own story. Marcus Evans stood at the podium of a packed community center, his hands gripping the edges as he looked out over the room. Journalists, local business owners, and curious members of the public filled the seats, their eyes fixed on him. Cameras clicked, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Next to him stood Kevin, his journalist friend, and Richard Sterling, who, for once, seemed content to let Marcus take the lead. This isn't just about me, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. It's about every small business owner who's been denied the chance to succeed because of a rigged system. I was told by Franklin First Bank that my business was a bad investment. What they didn't say was that the decision had nothing to do with my numbers, and everything to do with my neighborhood and the color of my skin. The room fell silent, the gravity of Marcus's words settling over the audience. Marcus recounted his experience with Mr. Preston, detailing the humiliation he endured and the systemic bias that Kevin's investigation had uncovered. Kevin followed up with data showing the discriminatory loan practices, citing case after case where qualified minority applicants were turned away. Preston's actions weren't isolated, Kevin explained. They were part of a larger pattern of systemic inequality at Franklin First Bank, a pattern that prioritized profits for a select few while shutting out hardworking entrepreneurs. When Richard Sterling took the podium, the atmosphere shifted. His polished demeanor and sharp words commanded attention, but he surprised everyone by owning up to his own role in the system. "I won't pretend I've been perfect," Sterling said. "I've benefited from the same practices I'm now working to dismantle. But it's never too late to make things right. That's why I'm here, to use my platform to expose this corruption and ensure it stops here and now." Sterling announced his resignation from the Franklin First Bank Board, declaring that he would dedicate resources to ensuring fair lending practices through a newly established independent foundation. The expose went live that evening, splashed across headlines and social media platforms. Kevin's article detailed not only Marcus's story, but also the broader implications of the bank's practices. The evidence was irrefutable: documents, testimonies from other business owners, and a clear pattern of discrimination. Public outrage was swift and fierce. Customers began withdrawing their accounts from Franklin First Bank en masse. Protesters gathered outside its headquarters, demanding accountability. The bank issued a statement of regret and placed Mr. Preston on administrative leave pending an investigation. But the story didn't end there. The Department of Justice launched its own inquiry into Franklin First, uncovering years of systemic bias and unethical practices. Within weeks, Mr. Preston was formally charged with fraud and discriminatory practices. Several other executives were implicated as well, their careers effectively over. As Franklin First crumbled under the weight of its scandal, Marcus's Bakery became a symbol of resilience and justice. Southern Needs was thriving like never before, its expanded seating area bustling with loyal customers who came not just for the peach cobbler but to support a business that had fought back against injustice. Marcus used the newfound attention to help others, organizing workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs and connecting them with fair lenders. The independent foundation Sterling had promised became a reality, offering grants and mentorship to minority-owned businesses. One afternoon, as Marcus watched Alana decorate cupcakes in the kitchen, Sterling walked into the bakery. He looked less polished than usual, his tie loosened and his expression uncharacteristically earnest. "Mr. Evans," he said, extending a hand. "I wanted to thank you. Your courage made this possible." Marcus hesitated before shaking his hand. "I didn't do it for you, Sterling. I did it for people like me and for my daughter." Sterling nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I understand, but regardless, you made a difference." Months later, Franklin First Bank officially shut its doors, unable to recover from the scandal. For Marcus, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for the community, for fairness, and for the small businesses that formed the heart of every neighborhood. One evening, as the sun set over Savannah, Marcus stood outside Southern Needs with Alana by his side. The bakery sign gleamed in the golden light, a testament to perseverance and justice. "You did it, Dad," Alana said, pride shining in her eyes. "No," Marcus replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. "We did it." The fight hadn't been easy, but in the end, Marcus had proven that integrity and community could triumph over corruption. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace, knowing his grandmother's legacy and his own were stronger than ever.